Well, Ukraine's parliament has approved President Volodymyr Zelensky's biggest government reshuffle of cabinet ministers since Russia invaded in February 2022. The reshuffle comes amid a surge of deadly missile attacks over the last week. Global Affairs editor John Lyons joins me now in the studio. John, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. We know that Ukraine has taken land inside of Russia. They were somewhat caught off guard and embarrassed by that, but Russia has retaliated. Can you bring us up to speed, a bit of a catch-up of where we're at?
Yes, Catherine, it's a two-pronged war at the moment. In the north or into Russia, Kursk, the Ukrainian army have moved in there, as we know, and taken the Russians by surprise and captured a lot of that area. We've seen that this week with the fantastic reporting by Catherine Diss and Fletcher Young from the ABC, the first and only Australian film crew to have got into Russia with the Ukrainian troops. So they've taken this whole area and they're putting up displays of pictures showing atrocities that have happened inside Ukraine. A lot of the Russians who are there say this is the first time they've seen these sorts of pictures. But on the east there, Russia keeps grinding away and slowly taking land, slowly pushing the front line a bit further into Ukraine. So it's quite a bizarre situation to have the Ukrainians taking land in one part and the Russians in another. But the net effect really, the net outcome is the Russians are slowly grinding away. They don't really have any accountability. Vladimir Putin has no accountability for how many young Russian men and women die at the front line. So for him, it looks like people are cannon fodder. He can keep it going as long as possible, whereas the Ukrainians have a certain pressure on them.
Let's talk about the politics behind all of this. We've seen the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy with a cabinet reshuffle. He says for new energy for their efforts here. What do you make of the timing of this?
I think this is all about almost coming up to 3 years now, believe it or not, since the Russians made their full invasion of Ukraine. Because Ukraine now has martial law, they can't go to an election. And so in a way, this is as close as President Zelenskyy can go towards refreshing his cabinet. About 9 changes and several key changes as well. And it's about, I think, trying to show new energy. It's no surprise that all of these ministers, after 3 years almost of a war, and including President Zelenskyy, daily pressure, you wonder how he's handling the fatigue. But after almost 3 years of it, a lot of these ministers are absolutely exhausted. So what he's done is he's brought in a few people. They're all loyalists to him. A lot of them are from his own office. So he's keeping things very tight. Loyalty is crucial for him. He's ruthless against anybody who is disloyal, and he's ruthless against anybody who indicates any corruption.
I mean, that's what some of the critics were saying. It does represent a consolidation of power by a very small group of Zelenskyy loyalists. Is there a problem in that?
Look, it could be. It depends how wide the advice he's getting, whether there's anybody like any chief executive or president or prime minister. You have to have those 2 or 3 people around you who are prepared to tell you things privately you may not want to hear. So what we don't yet know is, will some of these people be those people who are prepared to tell him if they think he's on the wrong path? We don't know that yet.
OK, let's talk about Ukraine's trajectory on the ground there. They have long argued that they need these long-range missiles to get deep into Russian territory, but NATO has resisted in letting them do that. Do you think there'll be any change on that issue? It
is changing now. Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, has said in the last few days that Ukraine has a right to self-defence, including long-range missiles. Up until now, Ukraine's been fighting this war with one hand tied behind their back. The Russians are able to fire deep into Ukraine, to Kyiv, even to Lviv this week, way across in the west of Ukraine. Yet the Ukrainians have not been able to fire anywhere near Moscow or anywhere else because the US and NATO are worried that that will provoke perhaps a nuclear response. We're seeing incremental increases. NATO is basically giving the green light to Ukraine not to go full attacks into Moscow, but to actually start penetrating further into Russia.
We know that Zelenskyy is preparing for a trip to the US to present his victory plan. With the US in election mode, what is the significance of the outcome of that in the coming months in relation to Ukraine?
Well, in the 3 times I've been to Ukraine since the war, they are more focused there almost on Washington than Moscow. They are absolutely obsessed about what will happen in November. They are in fear. The Ukrainian public I spoke to and their leaders are in fear that Donald Trump will win. He has said famously on CNN, "I can solve this war in 24 hours." What does that mean? I mean, that is an amazing thing to say. Ukrainians think that'll essentially say to Vladimir Putin, you keep the 20% of Ukraine you've already taken, and that's the end of it. That's the fear that Ukrainians have.